The firestorm ripped through Dresden, and she survived. But the real fight for Liesel Bauer began after the flames died down, when she had to learn how to live in a world that no longer felt real. When daylight finally broke through the thick, choking smoke, it revealed a horror Liesel's mind struggled to accept. Dresden was a skeleton of its former self. The streets were buried deep in ash, iconic buildings reduced to hollow, gaping shells. A terrible silence hung over the city, broken only by the cries of the wounded and the distant, rattling coughs of those who had inhaled the fire. The air itself smelled of smoke, of death, and of immeasurable loss. Her little brother Karl clung to her hand, his small voice trembling as he asked again and again, "Where is Mama? Liesel, where is she?" Liesel had no answer. She could only hold him tighter, shielding his eyes from the devastation that stretched in every direction. In the days that followed, survival became a grim, numbing routine. They moved from one overcrowded makeshift shelter to another, huddling with strangers who all shared the same haunted look in their eyes. They shared scraps of stale bread and watery soup, each bite a small victory against the gnawing hunger. Every day, long lists of survivors were posted on notice boards, and every day those lists seemed to grow shorter. Liesel would drag Karl along, her heart pounding in her chest as she scanned every name, her eyes searching desperately for their mothers. She studied every face she passed in the ruined streets, praying to see her mother's familiar, loving eyes looking back at her. But they never did. Slowly, painfully, reality settled in like the fine gray dust that covered everything. Her mother was not coming back. In that moment, something shifted inside Liesel. She was no longer just a sister. She became a guardian, a provider, a protector. She became a shield standing between her little brother and a broken, terrifying world. She traded her own childhood for the crushing weight of responsibility. She bartered their few remaining belongings for a loaf of bread or a handful of potatoes. She learned to stand for hours in long, silent lines for a ration card, her own grief locked away deep inside so that Karl would not drown in his. She had to be strong for him, even when all she wanted to do was crumble. Months later, the war officially ended. But peace did not arrive with cheering crowds or celebratory parades. For the survivors in Dresden, it arrived quietly, painfully, amid the ruins and the persistent hunger. Peace was just another day of trying to stay alive. The city began to rebuild slowly, brick by painstaking brick. And just as Dresden rebuilt itself, so did Liesel. She pieced herself back together, memory by painful memory, forging a new life from the fragments of the old one. Years passed. The rubble was cleared, and new buildings rose from the ashes. Liesel grew into a woman who carried the past in her heart, but she refused to let it consume her. She was determined to live, not just survive. She studied hard, worked tirelessly, and eventually became a teacher. In her classroom, she taught her students more than just dates and battles. She taught them about consequences. She told them how war doesn't truly end when the guns fall silent. She explained how its real weight is carried for a lifetime by civilians, especially by children, long after the soldiers have gone home. And what of Karl? He survived. With time and care, his lungs, scarred by the smoke, healed. His nightmares, once so frequent and terrifying, began to fade. He grew up with the unshakable knowledge that his sister had pulled him through fire itself, that her strength had been his lifeline. Decades later, a much older Liesel stood in a completely rebuilt Dresden. She watched tourists with their cameras cross the magnificent bridges that had once burned and collapsed into the river below. The city was beautiful again, vibrant and alive, but it was different. It felt stronger, wiser, as if the memory of the fire was etched into its very foundations. She closed her eyes for a moment and could almost feel the ghost of the girl she had been, the terrified child running through a world of fire, believing that the world itself was ending. She understood now that it hadn't ended. It had changed irrevocably, and so had she. Liesl Bauer was not a soldier. She never held a weapon or fought on a battlefield. But she survived one of the most devastating nights of World War II, and in the aftermath, she made a choice. She chose life. She chose to build, not to hate. She chose remembrance over bitterness. Her story isn't about placing blame or dwelling on the horrors of the past. It is about endurance. It is a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Because even when the sky itself seems to fall, even when fire and destruction try to erase everything you have ever known, the will to live can rise from the ashes. This story is a powerful reminder that behind every statistic of war, behind every number, there is a human life, a child, a family, a universe of memories. Survival isn't just about escaping death. It's about the long, difficult journey of finding meaning and purpose after unimaginable loss. Remembering stories like Liesl's is how we honor those who never made it out of the fire. It's how we ensure that the true cost of conflict is never, ever forgotten. Thank you for listening. Please consider subscribing for more stories that deserve to be told. On a winter night in 1945, the sky over Dresden turned into a sea of fire. A 14-year-old German girl named Liesl Bauer ran through streets that were melting, holding her little brother's hand as the air itself burned her lungs. She believed the world was ending. What she didn't know was that surviving that night would become the beginning of a lifelong battle between memory and hope, a story that would prove that even in humanity's darkest hour, the human spirit can endure. She looked up and saw the stars disappear, swallowed by flames falling from the sky. In that moment, she understood something terrifying. This was not just a bombing. This was fire meant to erase an entire city. Liesl had grown up believing Dresden was untouchable. It was known as the Florence on the Elbe, a city of music, paintings, libraries, and bridges that curved gracefully over calm water. Even as war devoured the rest of Europe, Dresden seemed distant from the front lines. Refugees would pass through, whispering stories of bombed cities and endless death, but Dresden remained standing, beautiful, confident, and dangerously unprepared. Liesl was 14 years old in February of 1945. Her father had been drafted years earlier and had vanished somewhere on the Eastern Front. Her mother worked long, grueling hours sewing uniforms for soldiers she would never meet. Liesl's main job was to look after her 7-year-old brother, Karl, whose lungs were weak and whose nightmares came often. Their apartment was small, but it was warm, and on cold evenings, Liesl would read aloud while bombs fell far away in other cities, on other people. On the night of February 13th, the sirens wailed just after dark. At first, people groaned more in frustration than in fear. Dresden had heard alarms before. Most of them ended in silence. But Liesl's mother grabbed their coats anyway, her instincts sharper than anyone's hope. They joined the stream of neighbors moving toward the basement shelter, Karl clutching Liesl's hand so tightly his fingers hurt. Then the first explosions came. The ground shook like an angry animal. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Somewhere above them, glass shattered. People screamed, not in panic yet, but in shock. Liesl felt her heart pounding so hard she thought others could hear it. Her mother pressed him close, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken in years. When the bombs stopped, an eerie quiet followed. Some people laughed nervously. A few dared to believe it was all over, but Liesl noticed the heat. It grew fast, an unnatural warmth crawling down the walls of the shelter like an invisible monster. The air became thick, heavy, and hard to breathe. And the second wave began. This time it was different. Firebombs rained down by the thousands, designed not just to destroy buildings, but to create a firestorm. Oxygen was sucked from the streets. Flames leapt across rooftops. The city was becoming a furnace. The shelter door burst open as people ran inside, screaming that they had to leave, that staying meant suffocating to death. Liesel's mother hesitated for only a second before pushing her children toward the stairs. Outside, Dresden was unrecognizable. The night sky glowed a violent, terrifying orange. Buildings burned from the inside out. The wind howled, a physical force that pulled people toward the flames. Liesel wrapped her scarf around Karl's face and dragged him forward, her mother following close behind. They ran. They ran past people who had fallen and couldn't get up. They ran past streets that had turned into rivers of fire. They ran past the sounds that Liesel would carry with her for the rest of her life. The heat burned her skin right through her coat. Her eyes streamed with tears she couldn't wipe away. Then came the moment that changed everything. A blast threw Liesel to the ground. When she managed to stand up, coughing and choking, Karl was still in her grip, but her mother was gone. Liesel screamed her name until her throat tore. The firestorm answered with a deafening roar. There was no time to search. The wind was pulling them backward, toward the flames. Karl was crying, barely able to breathe. In that moment, Liesel made a decision no child should ever have to make. She turned away. She dragged her brother toward the river, toward the only place that might save them. Every step felt like a betrayal. Every breath burned with guilt. But she did not stop. When they finally reached the Elbe River, the heat was still unbearable, but the air was survivable. They collapsed near the water as the city she loved burned behind them. Liesel held Karl through the night, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. By morning, the city was gone. And so was her mother. The girl who had read stories in a warm apartment was gone too, replaced by a survivor forged in the fires of Dresden. For months, Liesel and Karl drifted with thousands of other refugees. They learned to sleep in crowded barns, to beg for scraps of food, and to fear the silence as much as the noise. Liesel's guilt was a constant companion. At night, she saw her mother's face in her dreams, her eyes asking a question Liesel could never answer. Why did you leave me? In the camp, a woman from the Red Cross, a kind-faced lady named Helene, took an interest in the quiet girl and her sickly brother. She brought them extra rations and found medicine for Karl. More importantly, she gave Liesel a book. It was a simple book of fairy tales, its pages worn and soft. At first, Liesel couldn't bring herself to open it. Reading belonged to a different life, a life with her mother and a warm room. But one evening, as Karl shivered with fever, she began to read. As she read the familiar words of Hansel and Gretel, something shifted inside her. She wasn't just reading to her brother. She was reading to herself. She was reminding herself that even in the darkest woods, there could be a path home. That even when facing a witch in a furnace, hope was not lost. Reading became her anchor. It was the one thing that connected her past to a possible future. After the war officially ended, Liesel and Karl were sent to a small village in the west. Life was hard. Germany was a nation in ruins, grappling with its own monstrous guilt. But for Liesel, the struggle was simpler. To find food, to keep Karl healthy, and to find a reason to keep going. She worked on a farm, her hands growing calloused, her face weathered by the sun. She never spoke of Dresden. It was a locked room inside her mind. As years turned into decades, Liesel built a new life. She married a quiet man who understood the sadness in her eyes without needing to ask. They had children of their own. She became a librarian, surrounded by the books that had saved her. She watched Karl grow up, his lungs forever weak, but his spirit strong. He became an artist, and his paintings were always of vast, open skies, never of cities. But memory is a persistent ghost. One day, her granddaughter asked her, "Grandma, were you in the war?" Liesel, now an old woman with silver hair, looked at the child's innocent face. For the first time in over 50 years, she opened the locked door. She told her story. She spoke of the Florence on the Elbe, of the sirens of the heat, and of a mother she never saw again. She spoke of the guilt and the long, hard road to survival. As she spoke, the tears she had held back for a lifetime finally fell. But they were not just tears of grief. They were tears of release. She realized that by burying her past, she had also buried a part of herself. She had survived, yes, but she had not truly lived. Liesl Bauer's story isn't just about the horror of war. It's about the incredible resilience of the human heart. It's a testament to the fact that even when everything is taken from us, our homes, our families, our innocence, we can still find a way to rebuild. Her survival was not just about escaping the flames. It was about learning to live with the scars, to honor the memory of those lost by choosing hope over despair. In the darkest night of the 20th century, a 14-year-old girl lost her world, but she held onto her brother's hand and walked out of the ashes carrying a story that reminds us all of the enduring power of the human spirit.